experience or an event in your lifetime that you would consider a miracle?
Yes.
Yes. So a miracle of a healing relationship, a miracle of a healing body, a miracle of what?
Body.
Body. Miracle of body. Yay, body's healing. Miracle, miracle.
Instant response to the request.
Instant response, that's a miracle. Yes, it is. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, God. Oh my gosh. When my son was 4 years old, we were in a parking garage and the elevator doors opened and he shot out, full speed running into the lane where the cars go, and it was as if the hand of God turned that little boy around. He did a U-turn and came running just as fast right back to me. He missed getting hit by a car by inches, just by inches. And when I see that in my mind, and when I recall it, I still feel it in my body, that miracle, I know that God does not have hands. I know that God doesn't have hands, but that little boy turned around. So something in Chris knew. Something in Chris knew. So was it a God thing? In March of 2015, a 25-year-old woman driving her car in Utah ran off the road and ended up in the Spanish Fork River. The car was partially submerged upside down for 12 hours, they estimate, before anybody noticed it was there. And the first responders, when they got there, they kept hearing this adult voice saying, "Help me, help me." They didn't even think anybody was alive in the car, but they heard this adult voice saying, "Help me." So they took turns because they had to go into the water, and the water was so frigidly cold. So they took turns working on the car to get it turned enough that they could break the window and cut the only survivor out, which was the woman's 18-month-old daughter. The woman had died on impact, and that 18-month-old was the only person in the car. So was that the voice of God? Was it a God thing? And what is a God thing anyway? I mean, with those stories, and when we think about miracles that happen, I made a request and it was instantly responded to. I mean, a God thing is something that's beyond realities, beyond explanation, that just shows up in our lives in phenomenal ways. But I think it's more than that. I think a God thing to me is also the beauty of a sunset. It's the sight of dolphins dancing in the waves. It's the smell of springtime in the air. It is just the laughter of human people. Those are all God things. Eric Butterworth, who we are studying, Practical Metaphysics, talks about a God thing being God possibility as the Christ. And this is what he says about it. Christ is the God possibility within every person. It's your hope of overcoming, it's your hope of healing, it's your hope of growing and doing the greater things that Jesus promised you can do. It's a depth of you, not something that can be added on or put into, or something that you get just by believing in somebody else, even in Jesus. It's that which is the reality of you from the very beginning, the very foundation of your life. So repeat after me. I am a God thing. I am a God thing. I am the Christ. I am the Christ. I am my own hope of glory. I am my own hope of glory. We are the wholeness, the entirety of the divine. And it's not something that we have to acquire. It's something that's true at the very depth, at the very core of who and what we are. It's that solid foundation that we spring forth from in every moment, in every day. So why don't we see more miracles? Because we have a tricky mind. Yeah, we're not looking for them. We have a tricky mind. It's not that God is tricky, bestowing favors or miracles from time to time. It's our minds that are tricky because we've been taught to believe certain things. We've been taught to believe that there's not enough. There's lack and limitation. We've been taught to believe that only what we see is real. We've been taught to believe that only Jesus could walk on water. That's how tricky our mind is. Oh, that's pretty tricky. That's pretty tricky. I keep thinking of the Henry Ford quote, which I always want to say is, if you believe you can do a thing, you can. If you don't think you can do it, then you can't. But what he actually said was, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. You're right. So what do we do with this tricky mind? Yeah, there's a trick our mind plays that's the trickiest of all. And what is it called? Confirmation bias. Thank you so much. I didn't get it at the 9 o'clock either. It's called confirmation bias. It's like when we believe something is true, we're going to surround ourselves by information that supports that belief. We're going to surround ourselves by people who support that belief. Our mind is so attached to what it believes that we can organize the universe to say, we're right. Right?
Right.
Here's a cartoon. Did you read my paper on confirmation bias? Yes, but it only proved what I already knew. Right? Okay, here we go. Here's another cartoon. Hey, Mom, who's more open-minded, liberals or conservatives? Mom says, most people are open-minded about ideas they already agree with. And the child says, what the heck good is that? So we have this tricky mind. What the heck good is that? Well, it's good because it's got us to where we are today. Thank you, mind. But we also have what I talked about last week, this urge to transcend the troubles of the world. We have this urge to overcome. We have this urge to lift ourselves out of whatever experience we're having and have a greater experience of our spirituality. We have an urge to have a greater, more profound experience of the kingdom of heaven. More joy, more love, more peace. So, what are we waiting for? I read an interview about an entrepreneur, and he was the kind of entrepreneur that had the Midas touch. Everything, every business he started was golden. Every idea he had made money. Everything he put his mind to was super successful. So he decided one day he was going to write a screenplay. He didn't know anything about storytelling, so he started to do research. What does it take to make a successful screenplay? What are the components? What are the concepts? And what he found common to all of the screenplays he was looking at was they all began with an inciting incident. So something happened with the protagonist very early on in the story that forced that protagonist to go on a journey, to go into discovery, to find a way to improve him or herself, to change and to grow. So if you think about Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, the tornado was the inciting incident. Because do you think Dorothy would have ever gone to Oz any other way? No, she needed that inciting incident. And then the entrepreneur went on to say, we as people in our lives are waiting for that inciting incident. He said, we're waiting to have the heart attack. We're waiting to have the divorce. We're waiting to get fired from our job so we can begin living. If you know, and I know you know people who've gone through all of those things, and they might be horrific. They might have been very difficult. But what they come out with is, it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. I needed that inciting incident. I needed to have the heart attack because it was a wake-up call for me to start living my life. I needed to have the divorce so I could spread my wings and fly. I needed to get fired for that job so I could follow my dreams. The good news in unity and in applied metaphysics is we don't have to have an inciting incident. We can simply change our minds. We can simply decide, today, I am going to remember my foundation. I'm going to remember the core of who I am. Today, I am going to follow my urge for the transcendent life. That's good news. Yes. I am a God thing. I am a God thing. I am the Christ. I am the Christ. I am my own hope of glory. You got that right. Eric Butterworth says, there is within every person the potential for what American philosopher Henry David Thoreau calls the license of a higher order of being. That potential is within you. The license was always there. You don't have to somehow get God in the right mood so he will say, well, it's my will, and you can do it now. Because God has already done for all of us what God can do when he included us in his image likeness. The potential is there, all built in according to our uniqueness. Ours is the privilege of understanding it and releasing it and giving birth to it. I think the most fascinating sentence in the whole paragraph is this one right here. God has already done for all of us what God can do when he included us in his image likeness. So what that really is saying, and what it means to me, is that we have all the faith we're ever going to need. We have all the wisdom that we're ever going to need. We have all the zeal that we're ever going to need. And we have all the strength that we're ever going to need. In chapter 2, Eric Butterworth tells the story, and I went searching to corroborate the story because I like to give you guys good information. So I went on the internet and I Googled invalid Florida woman lifting car off of sun. Because the way he tells the story is she'd been an invalid for a number of months, that her muscles had become flaccid and that she was weak. She had actually not really gotten up on her own for quite a while. She was there in a wheelchair on the front porch when her son was working on the car on the other side of the yard, and the car collapsed. And she got up out of the wheelchair, she walked across the yard, and not only did she do that, she lifted the car so he could get out. So I went to the internet because I'm like, did this really happen? Well, I couldn't find that story. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. Just means I couldn't find it. But I found this in 1982 in Lawrenceville, Georgia. A man was repairing his 1964 Chevrolet Impala. The vehicle was propped up with jacks, but it fell. His mother lifted the car high enough and long enough for two neighbors to replace the jacks and pull the man out from beneath the car. In 2006, in Tucson, Arizona, a Chevy Camaro hit an 18-year-old bicyclist. The car went for 60 feet, pinning the bicyclist underneath. A witness lifted the Camaro while the driver pulled the teen to safety. No lie. In 2009, in Ottawa, Kansas, a man lifted a Mercury sedan to help a 6-year-old girl pinned beneath. In 2011, in Tampa, Florida, a college football player lifted a Cadillac Seville to free a man from being beneath the right rear tire. In 2012, in Glen Allen, Virginia. In 2013, in Oregon. In 2015, in St. John, Newfoundland. There are story after story after story. So after all these stories, do you think we would believe it was true? Yeah. Well, you would think, but they've done studies, and they call it hysterical strength. They say that we're so possessed by adrenaline that we do these things. But I think it's more than that. I really do. I think it's because we've gone beyond our tricky mind. It's because we've gone beyond our senses. Because we've, in a moment, in a nanosecond, in an instant, remembered the strength and the foundation, that core, that truth, that depth of who and what we are. That's where that comes from. And that's why it's repeatable. It's repeatable because it comes from the wholeness of who we are. It comes from applying metaphysics from that superconscious place, from that place of the divine, not because God is doing it, but because God is in us and we're doing it. I am a God thing. I am a God thing. I am the Christ.
I am the Christ.
I am the Christ. Oh my goodness. And I am my own hope of glory. I am my own hope of glory. I want to show you one last quote before we make our affirmations again and again and again. Oh, but before that, let me tell you about some ordinary people. I don't know if you recall the television series Stan Lee's Superhumans. It was from 2010 to 2014. I didn't remember the show, but I remembered the stories. So this guy, Dean Karnazes, he is a marathon runner. He ran 50 marathons in 50 states in 50 consecutive days. Talk about tapping into your wholeness. So he did that. He gets featured on the show, and then he wakes up one day and he says, I wonder how far I can run without stopping. He ran for 88 hours and 44 minutes. He ran 350 miles. Can you imagine? An ordinary human being like you and me. I mean, ordinary human beings. Here's another gentleman. He's from London, and I'm sorry I don't remember his name in the moment, but he can listen to an entire piece of music and then play it back perfectly. So the first time he hears it, he plays it. Ordinary people. I think this Stan Lee Superhuman this person would have been on Stan Lee Superhuman if he had been aware of her. Her name was Ann Jones, and she read Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, which is almost 700 pages long. I mean, it's a tome. She read it in 47 minutes. The whole thing, and then she could have a conversation and talk about it. I mean, she read it and digested it. I felt like I wanted to read it in 47 minutes. This is so good. But can you imagine? Can you imagine? Sometimes we can't imagine, so we have to see. We have to see it with our eyes. So these are real people, ordinary people. This is a kid. But seeing it, sometimes we have to see it to believe it. But all of that which is in them is in us. Take a breath. Don't blame God and don't give God the credit. Don't give the credit to God except for the God activity that is manifesting in and through you. Give yourself a pat on the back. Give yourself a pat on the back. Not from the ego sense, but from the realization of getting rightly centered in the process as it works. One last time. I am a God thing.
I am a God thing.
I am the Christ.
I am the Christ.
I am my own hope of glory.
I am my own hope of glory.